John Larkin,
Here.
Allison Pinkett Floyd,
Here.
Kristen Osmond Walsh,
Here.
Virginia Carlson,
Here.
Ken Marshall,
Here.
Sue Wiggins.
Here.
Thank you. If I could have a motion to adopt the agenda, please.
I move to adopt the agenda.
Second.
Any questions? Otherwise, all those in favor, say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 4. Do we have any public presentation to or discussion with the Board of Trustees?
We did not receive any.
Thank you. Moving on, could I have a motion to adopt the agenda, please?
We did it.
Oh, I'm sorry, an action item. Okay, I'm sorry. Could I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda, please?
I move to adopt the consent agenda items.
Second.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, could I have a roll call, please? No, I just, yes, say yes. We don't need a roll call, it's not money. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Committee reports. The audit committee did meet. We will be approving and discussing our request to open closed session minutes a little further down. Director Relations,
We did not meet.
Policy and Bylaws Committee.
We did meet. There are a couple of items on tonight's agenda.
Thank you. Moving on, any unfinished business between the board members? Hearing none, we'll move on to new business. We're going to change the order a little bit. We're going to have our presentation first by Jamie for the financial planning of the new building.
So good evening, everybody. It's good to be in person once in a while. So yeah, just an update. This really isn't much new. It's more just focusing down now on some of the things we talked about before with respect to the financing plan. But if we go to the, I have the clicker. I'm in control. There we go. So we've, working with Kelly Zabinski, who's worked with you for quite some time, we went over the numbers. We fine-tuned and refined a little bit. We're pretty, basically right where we were before. A little adjustment in the recommended borrowing. So before, I think we had $14 million. Talking with Kelly, maybe it's good to keep an extra $500,000 around. So now we're kind of targeting a split of the 29, $14.5 million cash, $14.5 million of borrowing. And that's targeting to leave you with a fund balance of 50% of annual expenditures, which gives you, I think, about 100% of annual expenditures in cash. I think it's a nice plan, gives you plenty of flexibility. Once the construction's complete, you should be in good shape. And we've made plenty of assumptions about what the new library is going to cost. I think when we get there, we have good flexibility all the way around with this borrowing plan. And I just wanted you to see the numbers, kind of how they lay out there down at the bottom of the building fund cash balance. You've got about $9.6 million, $9.7 million at the end of this year. Next year, you'll have the bond proceeds there. You see the $14.5 million in revenues. We'll also have the excess revenues from operations next year of $1.7 million. That'll leave you with about a $1.5 million at the end of the year to wrap the project up when it completes construction in 2022, 23. And you'll still have money left in the special reserve. That's actually just my dumping ground for excess funds. So if it turns out you get there and that's too much money, then that's when you can start talking about abatements and acceleration of debt service and things like that. But that's a discussion that you'll start having at the end of 23, 24 as you go into those years. All right. Any questions there just on how that's laid out? But that's kind of the plan right there. So just a quick, I thought it was good before we talk about timing, just to talk about interest rates. They remain favorable. You've seen some of these charts before. But you'll notice at the very end here on 2020, as we go into 2021, we've had a little uptick in the rates. And you might have been reading about it just in the last week or so in the Treasury rates. Actually, the top left, that's municipal rates. And, well, I'll make an interesting note in a second. But over on the right, the light green is the 2-year average, the dark green, the one-year average, and then the current rates in orange for the 1, 5, 10, and 20-year rates for municipal rates. And you can see we're pretty much at the bottom of the range. The light blue is the range where rates have been over the last 2 years. Rates went just absolutely to zero for a little bit, and now they've lifted back up. So we're not right pressed against the bottom anymore, but still very favorable. And what's interesting and potentially the thing that we want to watch, the bottom left graph there, that's Treasury Securities. And what you can see is, compared to the one above, which is municipal securities, it's just kind of interesting. Those Treasury securities have been moving up for a while, right? Several months they've been moving up a little bit, whereas the municipal rates haven't moved at all. And it was just, everyone was saying, how long can that go on? The rates have to follow each other. And so that's where you see that blip on the municipal rates on the top now. And so the concern is, we're still favorable. This is a hard thing to explain here, but that chart on the right, lower right, shows the ratio of municipal rates to taxable rates, right? And you can see that a year ago, municipal rates were, forget the 1 year because that's an aberration, for pretty much everything, 5, 10, and 15 years, those ratios were higher for municipals to treasuries. Today, they're lower. And so the fear is, not the fear, but the concern, the thing to watch is, if those ratios return towards where they were a year ago, right, that means those municipal rates are catching up to the treasury rates, and those treasury rates have been moving up. So there's potential. There's risk here that the rates are going to start moving up, and that's why it's worth talking about getting things in place to do the borrowing. Whether or not that means you actually do the borrowing before you've got the bids. Anyway, that's kind of the next topic of discussion on the next page. Anyone, that was a lot, probably more detail than you wanted on rates, but it's just interesting. So at least I find it interesting. So I wanted to show you that as the backdrop. So now, just to talk about, just look at one thing here. Yep, that's it. So let's talk about timing, because that's really what it's coming down to now. That's where we're at. You have kind of three options here, right? You know you're going to issue bonds, so it's just a question of when. We can set things up so that you issue them for the May meeting. Now, what that means is you're not going to have the bids. So we will be being fairly aggressive about saying, well, we're pretty sure and pretty confident that the building cost is going to come at $29 million and $14.5 million is the right number, okay? It lets you lock the rates and take out that uncertainty of any additional interest rate movements. And by the way, no right answer here. It's your comfort level that we're talking about. But it could result that, project comes in low, you've got excess cash at the end, which would be okay. You just use it at a later date, pay down the bonds a little faster. Or, the bids could come in higher, and then you have to go back because you don't have enough cash. Maybe a year from now you have to borrow a little bit more. So there's uncertainty in that strategy. You could authorize the sale of the bonds at the May meeting. In other words, do everything that the board needs to do to approve the sale of the bonds, and then delegate basically the details to the board president and the interim directors to sign off on the final details. And you're basically saying, yep, we know we're going to issue them. Just once we get the interest rates and they look good, as long as they're within these parameters, it's okay. And if that's in between board meetings and we just got the bids and we want to go, that's fine. You're basically authorizing that. And if you start not liking the interest rate environment or something like that, you can sort of have that flexibility. Or you could just wait till the June meeting, right? Or after the bids are received, and basically set everything up so that once we have the bids, we'll orient it around the bids. We can get going regardless. No decision has to be made really until the end of April, because we'll decide what we're doing at the May meeting. So you can, I'm not asking you to say, let's make a decision about this tonight. I'm just saying these are the things that, you're going to have to decide at some point. What I do want to say is just, I think it's time to start putting those wheels in motion and start doing the background work that's required to get the bonds going. So Happy to discuss those sort of options or let you mull them over and think about them separately, whatever you like.
Thank you. Any questions? Ken?
Yes.
Yeah. What is your best, I hate to say guess, but your estimate as to what interest rates may do, especially with this new stimulus package? I don't know if that's going to have any impact on rates or not, but my concern is that rates are at X. We wait 2 months and the rates are at X plus Y, as opposed to waiting 2 months and then rates are X minus Y. I don't see rates going down any further. If anything is going to happen, I suspect they're going to go up. Now, I'd like your opinion on that and your thoughts. Again, I understand it's our decision.
Yep.
But you're the expert, and I'd like some input from you as to your, for want of a better term, gut feeling as to what you think is going to happen with the rates and what might be our best course to follow, understanding that it is only advisory and that it's up to us.
Yeah, and it's not even advisory because no one knows. You know, if we knew where rates were going, there'd be a lot less people working, but because they'd all be retired. But and people have made wrong bets about interest rates. But one thing that I've been watching for a long time is those ratios, or are those ratios of treasuries to, of municipals to treasuries. And they've been very low for very long. So those ratios that you see from a year ago, those are a much more natural ratio. Even those ratios are low. So the fear is that regardless of what's happening to rates, generally, people are talking about taxable rates when they talk about rates usually. Even if just that relationship normalizing would drive municipal rates higher, right? Because the ratios would go back to sort of their long-term averages. So that's working against municipals right now, right out of the box. On the treasuries, I think we've had a pretty big move. I mean, that's a big movement in the rates there on the lower left. You can see the 20-year. It's still below what it was back in 2016, but that's a pretty big move. That's a full % up just in the last few months on the longer-term bonds. So, and you're hearing now people talking about inflation, but to me that move's kind of happened. I don't know how much more they're going to run up. I don't know. We'll see. The bigger risk to me is the ratios. Where municipals are relative to treasuries, and let's see if it's 10%. You've got, I don't know. Seems like it should be more than that, but 10, 20. Another 0.25%, maybe just from the normalization of those ratios. But we'll be ready in May's the soonest we can do it, so we can kind of evaluate in May. But if you're asking me where rates are going to, just no one knows. Right now, inflation is the fear, and that's what's driving the rates higher.
Yeah, well, my inference from what you're saying then is that what we have now is a somewhat abnormal situation, and as we begin to return to normality, the interest rates will probably tend to go up because historically they've been closer. So we're better off, it would seem to me, moving ahead sooner rather than later.
Going sooner,
just to lock in. But as you say, we can't do anything till May. But so in April, if we vote to issue the bonds essentially immediately, then you put them in.
You'd be ready for May.
Started.
Yep.
Or the other option, I guess, was to wait and maybe not make a decision until May or June as to.
Right, because then you'd know what the bids are and you'd be assured that you're borrowing the right amount. And, the other thing I try and counsel my clients is you're not necessarily in the business of guessing the interest rates. What you are in the business is making sure that you have enough money to pay for your project and fund it properly. And so at the margin, if rates are 0.25% higher, 0.25% lower, it's not going to make or break you. But, borrowing $2 million too much might, now you've got money sitting around earning nothing and you're paying interest on it,
Wouldn't we just immediately, let's say we ended up in that situation, because I'm feeling much more adverse about the interest rates. I feel like while they're favorable, I kind of want to secure them. That's just how I feel. If we ended up having more than we needed, wouldn't we just make that payment towards, to reduce the long-term how long we had the loan out, how long we could shorten that, how long it takes to repay the debt?
Yeah, within sort of within a way, I'll say it that way.
There's a
So
structured
basically,
way.
when you sell your bonds, they have a non-call period. You can't redeem them for a certain period of time, and we can make that period shorter. We can make that like 7 or 8 years. But if you had that extra money, you'd have to just say, okay, we're going to use that extra money. We're going to use it to the bonds, and we're going to put it in a fund. So we can't touch it. Nobody on the board can touch it. You don't have to do this. I'm just saying this would be an
It's a
option.
possibility.
Put it in that fund, and as soon as the call date hits, it'll sit there and it'll be invested for 7 years. And as soon as we hit the call date, then that money will go out. But that's going to sit idle in the meantime, earning whatever you can invest it at. So it's not quite as simple as saying, oh, we have extra money, let's pay down bonds.
Got it. Okay.
What's the flip side if we don't have enough? We don't borrow enough?
So the flip side is you just go and borrow a little bit more. You go out with a second bond issue and just borrow a little more. So if the project came in at 31, or the other thing is the board could say, hey, you know what, we don't like a $31 million project. Let's revisit some of these things that we're doing, and maybe we'll cut some things out to get back to the 29 million.
But if there was a crisis, like Ken had brought up, something unexpected that happens, you do have the ability to still borrow because the bond was approved at, what was it, Jamie, 25
Yeah,
million?
like 25 million or something,
So to borrow 14 or 15 million when you we had gone for 25, you've got protection for unexpected expenses that maybe are out of our control, that are incurred, that I don't know if you had given an example last time, Ken, and I don't remember what it was, but I think the same thing even happened with the building that we're in right now, that there was some architectural trouble with the deck, and it ended up costing the library at the time a substantial amount of money. I think there was even a lawsuit. Don't quote me on all this because it's old details that I'm not familiar with the facts on, except that we did have exactly that scenario. And the library had to come up with the funds to cover that. So I think you're okay either way. If it's not quite enough, you can borrow a little more. If it's too much, it can be set aside. It really is, Allison, what you said, what are you more risk averse to? Rates moving or going 2 months too early and not having your exact numbers?
Right.
So.
Although what you just said really stuck with me, which is we're in the business of building a building and having the money we need to buy a building, not like waiting to get the exact right
Talking
rate.
into your mic.
Sorry. We're in the business of building a building, not trying to sit here and wait till we get the exact, what kind of differential are we talking about
So
here?
that's exactly, yeah, I was just going to say, so 0.25% on $10 million, make sure I do that math right, but I'm pretty sure it's $25,000 a year. So it's not making or breaking which will diminish over time, as you pay off principal. But did I do that math, 10? 100, yeah, 25,000. Initially, and then, like I say, as you amortize it, it gets lower. The other thing to remember, so 0.5% of 50,000. But the other thing to remember is we budgeted originally like 1.6 million for debt service, and we're right now using with a 14-year amortization because we wanted to hit that 20-year mark. We're at like 1.3 or below 1.3. So in terms of budget, you're in great shape. You're not stressed at all. And
I guess I just want to cut the best deal possible that the library can get, and I don't have any fear that if we needed more, like, I'm not worried about being slightly over because, I know we'll put it back in and we'll pay down the debt over 20 years sooner. And I know that if we need more, we can get more.
I get that, but I guess I also
But
want.
I just don't want the rates to tick up and then it costs everybody
Well,
so much
I
more.
guess I'm just thinking of how much of an uptick are we talking about? Obviously, I would hate to not grab the rate and regret it later. but I'm looking at how much, I mean, yes, risk is an issue, but I don't know. When you made that statement, it stuck with me, and I wonder.
Well,
I also, we're responsible for knowing how much money do we really need and then borrowing what we need. But I guess it's just balancing. And what you're saying is there's kind of no right answer. I mean,
There's choices.
either way is right. Either way could be the right way to go. We just.
Or the best way to go,
The
like,
best way to go.
a better way.
and I'm sorry not to be more helpful on that, but it really is just a feel. Now, the other thing I'll say is a month from now, we'll have a month more of information,
that's right.
and
that's
so
a good way
we'll
to
see
look
how
at it.
things.
And what is the effect, you think, of inflation on all of this?
Well, that's the driver here, right?
Yeah.
Is inflationary
People
fears.
say
We haven't
there's a
actually
strong
seen
possibility
inflation.
of,
What's that? Yeah, we haven't actually seen inflation yet. It's interesting, when we were spending money hand over fist first time around, no one seemed to be worried about inflation at all. This time, all of a sudden, they're worried about inflation. So I don't know if
both
people
my
got
son
smarter.
and
They got,
son-in-law are in finance, and they're always, when we talk.
see what they say.
But,
See what they say.
well, yeah, they do talk about inflation and say, got to be careful. Those interest rates are going to change and
Yep.
go up.
It's a fear, and it's happening. It's happening right now. So we'll see what happens in April. And
So
think
I would say we should move forward for May.
sooner.
Vote in
Yeah,
April.
yeah,
and
right, exactly.
Right, so that would be my opinion of the board. What we're all agreeing on is let's keep moving forward so that April, we're ready to go
Right.
if we decide on that. But at least have the information.
General consensus, because
Right.
that will be an action item on the agenda
Right.
for a vote to proceed. And we can go forward and have that ready in May.
That would be
Yes.
fine.
And defer it. if
Yes.
choose
Do we need a
to.
vote? Because
Not now.
No,
Well, there's
no, not now.
reason
Wasn't
not
in
to
April,
do that
right?
today,
Right,
right?
to get that.
So-
Right,
on
you're
the
not
agenda for
approving.
next
week.
You're just telling me go ahead and get started. And and probably the decision point. We'll go. I'll do everything as though you were going to approve a bond sale in May at your May
In
board
April.
meeting. It'd be at May.
For April.
But I'll get ready, and what that means is probably in April we'll discuss, do you want to do it for May? Because that's probably the decision point. If you're going to do it at the May meeting, then we probably want to say so in April.
Give a little clarity here. In April, they're voting to,
So April, nothing. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, there's actually no action item in April.
Oh,
Sorry, did I get that?
yeah, I thought we said we would have a vote in April and go forward.
In May.
Sorry, no, maybe that's ambiguous the way I've written it that. So the only board action that's required to this point, because you did all those preparatory things, the only board actions that required is approval of the bond sale, which can be in the form of a parameters resolution or the actual approval of the
And
bonds.
we're talking
That
about
takes
that
place
in
May.
April?
No,
In May.
that takes place in May.
So nothing in
So
April.
the reference to April here is just saying, you got to tell me in April
What
if
to
you
do
want
in
the
May.
sale for May or if you just want to get the approval of the sale for May. But it's not a formal board action. It's just telling me what you want to do.
But
So I'm sorry for
I
the
think they
confusion.
just said they want you to be ready to vote
Yeah,
in May.
so, yeah.
So we have that answer.
So we'll go. Yeah, but the thing they're not telling me yet, or that's not decided yet is no, well, and we know the amount because we've stuck on 14 and a half. What you haven't said is, do you want me to show up at the May board meeting with the bonds sold, right? Right, those were the three options. So we'll go through the three options again. So we sell the bonds basically prior to the May meeting so that you're actually approving the bond sale at the May meeting.
Can you pause on that, though? Because if you're going to sell the bonds before the May meeting, they need a roll call vote in April.
No, they don't.
You sure?
Yes. Okay. So I can go into more detail on that,
Okay.
right? Because they could, well, never mind. I'll circle back around to that. Okay. Or are you going to approve that, you're going to delegate the ability to, approve this actual selling of the bonds to the board president and the interim directors subject to, certain parameters? You can do that at the May meeting, and then when we're ready to go, we go. Or you can say, we're just not approving anything yet. We're going to wait till June. That's the third option.
Because the bids are due.
So the way the sale works, and I think that's where the confusion is. So if you're selling for the May, basically what happens is prior to the May meeting, we would put a notice of sale out to the market. The day before the board meeting, we would take bids for the bonds, and then I would show up at the board meeting with the results of the sale for the board to approve. We'd say, these are the interest rates, these are the amounts, this is exactly what it is, and you would know, and you'd say, yes, that's the approval of the bond sale. That's because the bonds are sold, you're actually awarding the bidding of the bonds. And that's a competitive process. We're going to go out to the market, we're going to take bids, probably the day before or the morning of, depends on how that plays out, so that we have the interest rates when we show up at the May meeting. So that's one. That's the first option. The second option.
Hold on for a second.
Yep.
What if we say no? I mean,
Say no.
is the sale already made and we're locked in? Or?
No. Well, the rates are locked, but if you vote no, right, you have the ability to say, sorry. And you're not committed to, well, even with any of the options, right? Until the board passes a resolution accepting the sale of the bonds aren't sold. There's probably not going to happen. That is to say, you go out to a competitive bid, you get good bids. It's pretty obvious whether these are market bids when they come in. If they're market bids, you would have no reason to reject them.
Right. What would we be saying no to? No, we don't like that guy who's trying to buy our bond? I mean,
You'd say, we don't like the rates, or we think the rates are wrong.
But in April, we're going to be telling you to do that, correct?
Right, that's,
We'd be giving you guidance.
say, yeah,
And we want you to bring those bids.
Yeah.
And then we would be voting on them.
exactly,
Correct.
at the May meeting. And it's not a formal action in April because you don't need it. You're just saying the formal action is at the May meeting. So that's the first one. The second one is you say, well, we're not really ready to sell the bonds, sell the bonds yet. But we think we're ready, we're getting there. Bring us that resolution in May that says, yes, we're ready to say, go ahead and sell the bonds. And because we don't want to wait till the June meeting, we're going to just delegate the actual details, signing off on the interest rates to the board president and the interim directors, because at the end of the day, when you get those rates, they're going to be market rates, and we trust them to look at them and say, yeah, they're market rates. And then you can do that. You can do that actual sale in between the board meetings because you authorized it. And that's called a parameters resolution. And then the third way is just, we're not ready. We don't want to proceed until we actually get the bids. Let's just wait till we get the bids. We'll do it around the board meeting. If we don't get them for June, we'll wait till July. Whenever. That's sort of the third. But it doesn't seem like that's the way you're leaning right at the moment.
Is there some reason, either from a legal or a practical standpoint, technical standpoint, that we can't do all this in April instead of in May?
It's just, you're just not ready yet. We can't get it done by then.
Okay, that's what I
because
wanted.
we have to, basically the steps of the bond issue, you have to put together an offering document. You have to mail it to the
Okay. No,
rating
that's
agencies.
all I wanted to know.
go
We
through
just
the rating
can't do it
agency
technically
process.
or legally in that amount of time. That's fine.
Yeah, we just can't functionally get it done.
Okay.
The parameters resolution, the option 2,
Yeah.
that's a directive by the board. But it's not something that we vote on? Or
Yes, you vote on that.
We
That's
would
a
vote on
resolution.
it. And
Yep.
we're basically delegating the power to the board president and the director.
To sign off on
When
the
it's
rates.
ready, they're going to say go.
Yeah,
Okay.
You put what are the parameters you would put around that? Can you give an example?
Sure. So the parameters will be things like, what's the maximum interest rate?
Okay.
Usually, and by the way, these parameters are usually like very wide
Okay.
to give maximum flexibility. But in reality, you're going to look at those rates and say, if they're really bad rates, we're going to say, no, this was we're going to reject these. We'll come back in 2 weeks and see what happens, because it almost never happens. You get the bids, they're good bids. You're going to be well rated. But anyway, so the interest rate, the maximum final maturity, so we can't go more than, say, 14 years or whatever. Or if you want to give them the flexibility to go a 15th year or whatever. The call date, right? What we talked about, when you can, what's the longest call date? You want to be able to call these no later than 8 years out, or 9 years out, whatever it is. The maximum debt service, the maximum principal to come due in any year. That's pretty much the parameters. It just sort of bounds the bond issue.
And so that's the type of those are the details you're going to put together for our next.
That would be in the parameters resolution if you were going to do a parameters resolution, yeah.
And when would we sort of see that and have a discussion of that? Would that be the April meeting? As we're
It would just, I
preparing?
mean, technically, the way it would normally work is it would be in the resolution that you'd get in the board packet, and you'd look through the board packet and see what those parameters are. If you wanted me to prepare that, like, for April, so we just talk about it, not the parameters resolution itself, but just, talk about the parameters, say this is what we're thinking of. I mean, I don't want to overcomplicate this, but we could even pass the parameters. There would be no point to it. We could pass the parameters resolution in April, but there'd be no point, I mean.
So
Well, wait,
Can't
I
get it done
just
before May
was
anyway.
wondering when the details would
Yeah,
sort of.
we can do that in April or whatever.
So would the reason to do that be to give more time to have more solidity or to understand where we are with the bid numbers instead of waiting a whole, because
Right.
maybe 2 weeks from the board meeting, we would know more in terms of where the project is coming in with cost, right? Is
Exactly.
that the reason
That's-
to, okay,
Yep, exactly. But you didn't want to wait till June.
right.
We may not have those numbers until the end of June or early July, so,
Oh, really?
right.
Those are the main ones, though. There's two big packages, so.
Okay.
We'll have at least two, we'll get an idea.
It-
Before we get the big package.
I would say if we're watching interest rates rise, you may not want to wait until July, or then again.
So is your thought, Claudia and Sue, with your understanding of where the bidding is coming in, May versus June, we're not going to know any more in June than we will in May?
Possibly. So,
Okay, so
We
the,
will have the bid for the demolition, we will have had the bids for the abatement, and just as an aside, when we went over with the prospective bidders, and the Midwest Environment said that he expected maybe 5 groups to show up, and 8 did
that's for the abatement.
for the abatement.
Okay.
And he said at that time, you're going to see probably, because it's going to be very competitive,
okay.
because people have been out of work for such a long time.
So this is good, that's in our favor.
It's beneficial. to
Yeah, okay, good.
I think it means there's going to be less likelihood that we're going to be surprised by bids that are higher, which means there's potentially less risk for you to decide
Yeah.
in May while rates are good.
Right,
And because they're public bids, the motivation for the bidders is to bring us
the lowest
bid.
price,
They're the ones that
yeah,
win.
right. Okay, well, so that's good to know. So there's not a lot of more knowledge we're going to have until July.
Or late June.
For the construction.
Right, okay.
We'll know the bids for the demolition, and we'll know the bids for the abatement next week.
Okay.
I think, go back to Jamie's comment earlier, that whatever decision,
What's that?
whatever decision, you will be all right, I think. It's going to be okay if you decide to proceed with the bonds. And you'd said it too, if we end up short, we've got an alternative. If we end up with too much, you've got some alternatives. I trust the work that Frederick Quinn's done. I think
They're accurate, they're
Yeah.
feeling pretty comfortable about
they're very
what they've
reputable. And
said we're going to need.
Yeah,
Okay, so just let me, 30 seconds to summarize. We think we're going to have to spend X. So my feeling is that we borrow X or maybe a little bit less. And that way, if we have to borrow a little bit more to get to X, you said we can go back and do more bonds, as opposed to borrowing X plus Y, not needing the Y, and then it has to sit in some fund somewhere for 7 years before we can do anything with the money. So it would seem to me, from a common sense standpoint, we borrow what we think on the target, but we don't want to go too high. If we have to make a decision, I'd rather go a little bit lower than go back and get the money we need, than to go too high and have this $2 million sitting in some account somewhere for 7 years that we can't touch.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
It's not unreasonable. I think if we look at the pro forma, the projection, right, and based on the fact that the cash is, that the debt service is lower than what we projected anyway, and I'm thinking this through on the fly, so I'm not committing myself to this line of reasoning, but you should have surplus, continuing after after the project's completed. So let's say it was $1 million, you needed an extra $1 million. Even if, let's say we borrowed 14 and it turns out we needed 15, right? Then you could use a little extra cash, right? Because we have 100% of your expenditures in cash that we're projecting, so you don't need 100%. You could spend $1 million of that, right? And replenish it over the following 2 or 3 years, and it might delay your decision about abating the levy down a little bit, or, but, so you wouldn't even necessarily have to, if it was $1 million or $1.5 million, we might be able to work it out to the numbers, so you don't even have to go back and borrow more,
If you go high, then we're stuck with that money that we can't do anything with.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think that's not unreasonable, yeah.
okay. Thank you.
Okay, so any other questions or comments from the board? I think we're all pretty comfortable in keeping moving forward and come back in April with some more information, and hopefully we'll have a decision for the May board meeting then, what we're going to do.
Perfect. All right.
All right,
Thank you. This was
Thank
fun.
you, Jamie.
Thank you. Good
Have
to
a
see
good
you all.
Okay, so now going back to new business, we'll go up to A for a building update. Claudia, Sue?
Yeah.
And Sue, don't forget your mic.
We're gonna
Jamie stole my mic.
I was gonna say, we're gonna split this a little bit based on what we've put in the executive team and cross-departmental reports.
Okay.
The closing on the easement, I emailed all of you, happened yesterday. So all 3 properties are now closed, and ours. We had quite a few meetings. We're sorting out some of the accounting things that we have to do. There's taxes that the 425 and 401 owners would owe, so that money will be set aside. Michelle Bauman will work with our accountant to assure we've got that tracked separately from our other operating expenses. It'll be tracked, and we will owe that taxes, not as a nonprofit, but holding an escrow on these buildings. We did have a number of design and construction planning meetings in the last month. In fact, quite a bit. We made a lot of progress. The details are in the report if you have questions on any of that, but we're moving forward. And Sue has been working tremendously and a lot on the asbestos remediation bid, so she can report on that. And she will be the point person for the bid cycles, both for this asbestos, but also for the demolition and the construction. So she's going to be carrying those details. I'm turning it over to you.
So we did go over to the site, and as I mentioned, that the prospective bidders, the contractors came to do a walkthrough, and they got a bid package. And so they will be needing to turn their bid proposals to, and they're sending them to the library, and they need to be received by 11 o'clock on the St. Patrick's Day, the 17th. And then they will be opened live. And typically, pre-COVID, you would actually have, they would come and be there in person to see who wins the bid, who's the lowest bidder. But we're going to be doing it virtually. And so we have the link on our website so that they can tune in and watch that. And we probably will do that with the second round of bids, which is going to be the demolition bidding. And but the third one, the construction bid, the bid documents too, that's intense because that's every trade that you need for construction. And we've been told that there could be up to 100 bid packages that come in that. And even if it's in June or early July, I'm wondering I don't know if there's going to be a location where we can have 100 people safely gather. So we probably will continue to do that, and we may borrow the village's room here to do that particular one too. So maybe some can come in person, but we'll work on making sure that happens. So that's how the process is going to continue. And we have to they have to have an advertisement in the paper, and we put that in the paper to let the people know that the bids are happening. And so we're on our way. So the abatement is going to begin the first week of April, and they're going to go in, and there's a lot of work to be done in Mr. Z's. There's a little bit of work that needs to be done over at the 425 building. That building is not getting bid because it's going to be under $20,000, so it doesn't need to be. And so they're just going to select somebody that they are familiar with and they know their work and they trust. but that's scheduled to be completed at the end of April. And at that point, then the bid process for demolition should be fairly completed. So you guys will approve the bids for the abatement on the 22nd, and then there'll be another date for approving the demolition bids. And then we're going to have a tear down party. We're actually looking at securing a drone to maybe do some videotaping of some of the demolition. And once the demolition is completed and the ground is leveled, that would be sometime in June. That's when we hope to have a big, massive, groundbreaking hoopla at that point. So lots to look forward to this summer.
Right around the corner. And side note, the construction fence around that property is scheduled to go up March 17th. If that changes, we'll let you know. And Sue and the marketing department will be working on some signage, and Frederick Quinn will also have some required signage they have to put up, particularly in the COVID cycle. And we'll be on our way.
Exciting.
Yay.
Exciting.
Yay.
Have we made plans to like remove the mailbox that's up there? I haven't noticed.
Yes, but I hopefully it will be removed. And I did talk to Frederick Quinn. I've made a couple calls to the post office. They have to reach out to their district office, and they know we're on a timeline. And I will be calling to let them know March 17th is the construction fence date. But Frederick Quinn has said if they need access, there will be an opening that they can come and go. But we've put that request in several weeks ago.
And where did we come up with the letters? That was exciting to see on the, where did, you were able to locate them in the building?
No, we had to get new ones.
That's okay.
We were able to locate them in the building, and
They only had a few. There wasn't the ones that we needed. And Phil did that at like 7 o'clock in the morning, and by himself. He probably could have used some help, but it was done, and it was very exciting to see that. And I think it's certainly already starting to create a little bit of excitement in the community.
Very good. Did you receive any response from neighbors for your letter that you sent out saying we're coming? Anybody reply back with that?
You know, we also included an ability to sign up to receive email. So we did receive a few folks that want to receive the notices via email. And then we just sent a letter out to the neighbors to the south to try to schedule a meeting with them to let them know how the construction is going to be affecting their property. The construction fence initially for the abatement will not be on their property, but when we do the demolition, it will encroach, and so we'll need to have an agreement with them to let them know that we'll restore the property back to the way that was, if not better.
Very good. Okay, any other comments in regards to the new building?
I have just a general question. When do we finalize things like, we've had some previous discussions about maybe having a reinforced wall so that we could put a third story on, which I think in the future, which I think we pretty much said no to. But we still had some open discussions about a potential green roof and potential solar panels. And I don't know that we finalized our decisions on those. How soon do we have to make a final decision on that?
I will tell you, actually, Allison brought this up too, and we reached out to Sean. They took away from that board meeting that the plan was to have the roof reinforced for solar panels, and not to necessarily have them installed, but to be ready to install them. And that's the design that they went forward with based on the conversation with the board at that time. So
I think that's pretty, and they're not going to go ahead with the green roof then?
No, that was,
I think we decided against that.
Yeah, right. That was their takeaway, and that was the planning. And if we are going to go back and revisit that, we will set ourselves back quite a bit. So.
Okay, any other comments, questions in regards to the building update? Okay, hearing none, if I could have approval or motion to approve action item C.
I make a motion to approve the updated and new policies. Shall I read them all?
No, the one as presented is fine.
As presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, we all have the packets. Does anybody have any questions, concerns, issues with anything?
I do not.
Hearing none, then could I have a motion to approve them? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion C carries. Moving on, could I have a motion to accept item D, the opening of the closed minutes?
I move to approve the opening of the closed minutes as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, we all have these. This is what the audit committee presents to have open. Sue did a ton of work, Sue Wiggins, on going through and listing all of these one at a time, which I thank her for. Is there any concerns or questions on these? Hearing none, could I have all those in favor say aye, please?
Aye.
And opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to item 10, do we have any communications?
I did want to mention that I have been working with the village, with Avis over at the village, and with Bill Hennef to make sure that we're coordinating communication efforts so that particularly when we get underway with construction, when we need to close lanes down, for instance, and certainly to let the neighbors know when equipment's going to be coming and going and all of those types of things. So we're going to be working directly with the village to make sure that our communication is completely aligned.
Very good. Any other questions for Sue or Claudia from the board? All right, well, let's move on to item 11, the library director's report. We all have a copy of that.
Yeah, and some of this we just covered with the building updates, but I did want to point out the upcoming board dates, the special board meeting on March 22nd. Only thing planned on that agenda is the approval of the abatement bids. So that should be, I think, relatively short meeting. And then the April 21st, that is the other date. January and April were the third Wednesday of the month based on room availability. So just make sure you've got that on your calendars. It's a change from our usual second week of the month or second Wednesday of the month during COVID.
And just a moment.
Yeah.
The March 22nd is at 6 p.m.?
Yes, it's at 6 p.m.
Got it. All right. Just
So
And
get in
we will
and
be live in this room, correct?
thank you, Jenny, because that's also a change from usual. The consolidated election, that was just for your information, but yes, the oath of office will be planned for new trustees at the June meeting. And then per capita grant, that's just to let you know it was submitted. Thank you all for taking time over the last 4 months to read our reviews, and thank you for taking a look at the policies. That's next on there. Strategic planning update, we will be back in April with the graphic and a little more refinements to the plan for your approval. So we'll look forward to that in April. The expanding the building hours, I do have one modification for this. We are an election site on Tuesday, April 6th, and the only space we have to do that right now with the pandemic is in the front lobby. So we are going to postpone that opening to Thursday, April 8th, because that's the first day. It's Tuesday and Thursday mornings we'll be reopening. And we will be closed for the traffic in the building on election day because everybody comes in the front door, exits out the side. We are working with the admin team to determine what level of services we can offer. Staff will be working that day, and we'll be handling reference calls. We're going to do everything that we can that's not in person that we can handle with the staffing and the doors. So stay tuned. We'll put a plan in place and we'll let you know what it was. We'll put it on the website. I'll send you an email. But that's a little bit of a change. I don't know that we really, if we had anticipated we'd be in this pandemic phase this long, the election, handling that as a polling place is really a double challenge for us in terms of trying to handle the space for the election and the space for patrons and the space for staff. I don't think anything else on here, unless you've got questions, is an update.
I had a question.
Sure.
On page 4 of 16, the second item on the top, it says February 4th. I just wondered why it says meeting virtual with Jason Brandt to review upcoming January board meeting.
That would be an error on Claudia's part.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
Thank you.
They're very forward-thinking.
Very.
A little strange.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments in regards to the library director's report? Hearing none, we will move on to the departmental reports. Any questions, concerns that we have to address? Hearing none, I will move for adjournment then at 7:50 PM. Do I have a motion?
Well, wait a minute, there are several other reports, departmental reports.
Oh,
Youth and Teen Services and a number of the other, let's say Youth Services, about the 5 email newsletters, it looks like those are quite successful. It says subscriptions have been going up. Is that something that we've been publicizing, or it's just been kind of people are trickling in, and we're getting more subscribers to each?
I would say both. I think that they've been working really closely with the schools on some of those e-newsletters. And I don't know, Sue, you might have some more insight from your marketing meetings in terms of how that's going.
They've been quite well received, and they have been well promoted via the email newsletter, and in the upcoming Gazette newsletter, there'll be information about that. But they're very they're targeted, and this is kind of a pilot for us that we will eventually, as we move forward, do a lot of very custom, types of email for very specific markets and audiences that will be interested in particular types of materials and services.
Okay. And just one more thing under technical services. It says RFID, 6,325 items were tagged in February. Approximately 12% of the collection has been tagged so far. Are we shooting to get everything tagged before we make the move to the...
Absolutely. Yes. And Alex, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but yes.
No, that's correct. We'd like to have that done well in advance of the move. So at the rate we're going, we'll be picking up speed in the next couple of months here as we get more staff trained to assist with that. But I would expect it would potentially be done before the end of this calendar year, certainly before the move.
Okay, yeah, because we've got time. I was just hoping that we'd be able to get that finished. And one other thing, facilities. It says received, stored, staged, and started returning demo furniture for the new building. What was that about? Did somebody actually bring out furniture?
Oh, it was an enormous effort on Phil's part, because normally when you're looking at furniture, they would make arrangements for us to go visit the Merchandise Mart. There were restrictions in place and we could not do that. So our designer from Ingberg Anderson made arrangements to have a lot of samples. And when I say a lot of samples sent to us from these various collections. And so we had a little mini, I don't want to say mini Merchandise Mart because the Merchandise Mart is huge, but a wonderful representative sample. I don't know how many chairs were there. There were at least 50.
There were about 40.
Yeah, I was going to say there were at least 50. And some tables.
And tables, and there was some cool things like for the teen space that we took a look at. Some pod type things for study areas.
But these were coming from many different furniture manufacturers, so maybe it was one chair from one and 5 from another, and they were arriving off and on all.
The emails were coming constantly, and Phil and his team, it was to like 10 deliveries a day, 12 deliveries, and these are big pieces of furniture. They had to be brought in, unboxed, put into the auditorium. So it
was an extraordinary effort on Phil's part, and I will also add. We had been storing some in the quiet reading room and some in the auditorium. And when the designer got there, we were in another meeting and came out, and they had moved all the quiet reading room stuff down into the auditorium so that the designer could arrange them by something logical, like office chairs or chairs for adult services area, or here's something for the teens. So they were grouped and you could kind of look at them that way. So it was the pandemic approach to trying out some furnishings and in lieu of a visit to the Mart.
Who's going to make the final decision on that? Is that you, or you're talking to staff? And
we really trust our designer on this, but the admin team is involved, and as they are looking at things that work for their department, they're going back with pictures and images to their staff. So I would say no one person is. It's collective. And I think at some point, but I don't know when, there will be some images that they can come and show you populated with some of the furnishings. But it is a multi-stage process. Sarah, our designer, started with, more than a month ago, I don't remember if it was December or January, but just images. Here's 6 chairs, what appeals to you? And the whole group of the admin team would like that, don't like this looks great. Oh, that arrangement would look wonderful between the stacks and the adult services, and narrowed it down from that. So she had already narrowed down based on images and thoughts. And this was more like comfort. We didn't have a full look at all the fabrics because industrial strength vinyl is really important to us. So some of the chairs we saw were fabric, but of course they come in vinyl. And I know at one point, I don't remember if this was community conversations or here, but you saw the color palettes that she had pulled out. So that's all still coming together. And I'm sure there will be something to present to the board at some point where you'll see.
And they want
what
to
it
put
looks like.
together packages
Right.
with, say, families, so there's one manufacturer that does a wide variety of different types of things that are kind of in a similar style, which of course would be much more cost effective. But there is a bid process also for furniture that will happen, so that they'll present their packages and there'll be several options, and there's a specific way to do that, but that won't be until after the first of the year.
Okay, my question was, I just want to make sure that there was some input from the managers and the troops on the ground, so to speak, because I heard horror stories from some library I won't mention where they will order all these chairs without talking to people, and it turned out their chairs were too tall for the kids. The kids, they'd almost climb up on the chairs to try and get in them in the children's department. It was a waste of money. They had to replace them all. So as long as there's input from the people who are actually
Absolutely.
working in each department.
Absolutely.
And also, for those of you who remember the old library when it was really going, or the present library, I should say. You remember the orange, backless, practically, just armless, terrible chairs. Hopefully, this designer will not be quite.
Ginny, I don't like those either.
They were awful.
I agree.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
All right, well, thank you. So, any other questions or comments? A motion to adjourn then
Make a motion
at
to,
7:57 PM?
I'll make a motion to adjourn at
Seconded.
7:57.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much for your time, everybody.